I still remember that afternoon as if it happened 5 minutes ago. The light was pouring through the windshield, warm and soft, and I was humming to myself while waiting for Michael to come back from the grocery store. I wasn't looking for anything, just reaching into the glove box for a tissue. And there it was. A small white stick, tucked awkwardly between a map and an old pair of sunglasses. I picked it up without thinking, not realizing at first what I was holding. And then I saw the two pink lines. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My heart stumbled, skipped, and then pounded as if it was trying to burst out of my chest. A pregnancy test. But not mine. Not mine. I held it as if it might burn my hand, staring at those lines that seemed to glow like neon. My first thought, ridiculous, desperate, was that it must be a mistake. Perhaps one of the kids, maybe Anna had borrowed the car. No, she wouldn't. And Michael? Michael, my husband of more than 25 years. Why would he have this in his car? I pushed the thought away, hard as if shoving it into a dark corner. Mistakes happen. People drop things. Maybe it wasn't even his car that day. Maybe a colleague had borrowed it. I told myself anything, everything, just to calm the trembling in my hands. But the silence inside the car grew heavier and heavier, pressing against me until I thought I might cry out. I kept hearing my own voice inside my head. This can't be real. This can't be happening. Yet the stick in my hand said otherwise. Two pink lines, bold and undeniable. When Michael returned with a bag of groceries, he smiled at me, the way he always did, casually, almost absent-mindedly. I slipped the test back into the glove box, my fingers shaking, and forced a smile. My lips felt like paper. I wanted to scream at him, to hold it up in front of his face and demand an explanation. But instead I sat still, clutching the steering wheel, nodding as he talked about the price of apples. All the while my mind was spinning faster and faster like a carousel I couldn't get off. Could it be... was he... I couldn't even finish the sentence inside my head. The thought was too poisonous, too sharp. And yet, it had already pierced me. That evening I set the dinner table as always, laying out plates, folding napkins, pretending my world hadn't tilted on its axis. But every time I glanced at Michael, I saw that little stick, hiding in the glove box, waiting for me like a ghost. And I knew, though I fought it with every breath, that nothing would ever be the same again. That night, after Michael had fallen asleep beside me, I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that presses into your ears until you hear your own heartbeat. I kept telling myself, it was nothing. A mistake. A misunderstanding. Why was I even thinking about it so much? People leave things behind in cars. Maybe it wasn't even his. Maybe I was inventing shadows where there was only light. But then the question whispered back to me, cruel and insistent. Why was it in his glove box, not on the floor of some random taxi? Why right there, hidden under maps and sunglasses? I turned over, trying to quiet my thoughts, but they followed me, nipping at me like mosquitoes in the dark. I could almost hear my mother's voice from years ago telling me, "Don't go looking for trouble or you'll find it." Was I doing exactly that? Was I digging holes in solid ground just to see if they'd collapse? And yet, the image of those two pink lines kept flashing in front of me, brighter than the darkness around me. I closed my eyes, but it was still there. Two lines, like two little daggers cutting straight through my chest. The next morning I watched Michael butter his toast, calm and unhurried, as if life was perfectly ordinary. I wanted to believe him even though he hadn't said a word. I wanted to step back into that comfort where his smile meant safety, where his presence was the anchor of my day. But I couldn't help hearing that voice inside again. What if he's not who you think he is anymore? I shook it off, forced a laugh at something trivial he said. He looked at me with those familiar eyes, warm and brown, and for a moment I felt foolish. Ridiculous. Why was I letting a forgotten object unravel the fabric of 25 years? My marriage wasn't a glass ornament that could shatter over a misunderstanding. Surely I knew my husband better than that. But as I cleared the breakfast table, my hands trembling slightly as I stacked the plates, I whispered inside myself, "Why am I so afraid? Why does my stomach twist every time he picks up his phone? Why can't I let it go?" By the time I poured myself a cup of coffee, the liquid steaming in the quiet kitchen, I realized the truth. It wasn't just the test. It was the weight of suspicion, heavy and invisible, settling over my shoulders. And once that weight was there, no matter how I tried to shrug it off, it clung to me like a shadow that refused to disappear. The days that followed looked almost ordinary on the surface. Dinner at 7, the soft clatter of silverware, Michael talking about work, the television murmuring in the background. If someone had walked into our kitchen, they would have thought, this is a normal family, a couple who has shared decades together, settled into the rhythm of life. But beneath that calm surface, something had shifted. I could feel it, like a hairline crack in glass that no one else sees, until it spreads. Michael's laugh, once comforting, now sounded rehearsed, almost too loud. The way he looked at his phone, holding it just out of my line of sight, it made my chest tighten. I told myself not to notice, not to connect dots that might not even belong to the same picture. But once you've seen a crack, you can't unsee it. One evening he came home late, saying the traffic was worse than usual. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume, not strong, not obvious, but enough to make my breath catch. I forced myself to believe it was nothing more than my imagination, the power of suggestion. I had read about that once, how the mind tricks you into smelling things that aren't there. Still, as I stirred the soup on the stove, I whispered to myself, "You're being paranoid, aren't you?" At dinner, he reached for the salt, smiled, and asked about my day. Such a small moment, yet my mind raced. His eyes slid past mine too quickly. His hand brushed mine, but the touch felt like a stranger's. And when he laughed at something I said, it didn't reach his eyes. It was as though we were actors, reciting familiar lines on a stage, pretending to be the people we once were. Later, as we watched television side by side, I found myself studying him instead of the screen, the way his shoulders relaxed too much when a message pinged on his phone, the way he tilted the screen away from me without even thinking about it. My heart squeezed, tight, unbearable. I wanted to believe this was the same man who once left me love notes on the bathroom mirror, the man who held my hand through the birth of our children. But the cracks kept widening, spreading silently through our days. And then, lying in bed with the glow of the alarm clock on the wall, I whispered to the darkness, maybe I don't want to know. Maybe if I don't ask, the truth can't hurt me. But even as I said it, my chest ached with the knowledge that the truth was already here. I could feel it in the silence between us, in the spaces where love used to live. It happened on a Tuesday morning, so ordinary it should have slipped by without notice. Michael rushed out of the house late for a meeting, his tie crooked and his voice quick. I was clearing the breakfast dishes when I heard the faint buzz on the counter. His phone. He had left it behind. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding in my throat. For years, I had never even thought about touching Michael's phone. Trust was as natural as breathing. But that morning, the weight of suspicion pressed down harder than my own conscience. I told myself, just a glance, just to calm your mind. Yet my hands shook as I reached for it, as though I were about to cross a forbidden line I could never step back from. My fingers hovered, trembling. "What are you doing?" I whispered to myself. "Why are you acting like this?" But another voice answered, "Because you already know something is wrong." I slid the screen open. His passcode, the same one he'd used for years, unlocked the world I had always trusted but never entered. At first, it was harmless. Emails, a few missed calls, calendar reminders. And then I saw the folder of photos. My thumb tapped it before I could stop myself. The first image froze my blood. A young woman, her belly softly rounded, glowing beneath her dress. Her hands cradled the curve of it tenderly. The caption beneath it read, "Our little secret," I gasped, covering my mouth as if someone might hear. My knees weakened and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. I swiped again. Another photo closer, the curve of her body undeniable. Another caption, a smiley face, a heart. And then, one of Michael's hands resting on her stomach, his wedding band gleaming in the light of someone else's happiness. My breath shattered into pieces. Tears blurred my vision, yet I couldn't look away. Each photo was a blade, carving deeper and deeper, leaving nothing but rawness behind. I whispered, "No, no, it can't be." But the evidence glared back, undeniable, mocking. I dropped the phone onto the counter as though it had burned me. My whole body trembled. I felt both sick and hollow, my heart pounding with the weight of betrayal. The silence of the house wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I just stood there, staring at the device that had once been nothing more than a tool for calls and messages. Now it was a weapon that had shattered my world. And I knew. There was no turning back. The truth had stepped out of the shadows, and it was staring me straight in the face. I stumbled into the living room, my hands clutching at the arm of the sofa as if the ground beneath me had tilted, as if the whole house had shifted off its foundation. My chest was tight, my throat burning, my heart a wild animal thrashing in a cage. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even think straight. All I could hear was one word, over and over, betrayal. How could he? After all these years, after the children, the promises, the nights when we held each other through storms of life. How could Michael throw it all away? My mind screamed, but no sound left my lips. It was as if the betrayal had stolen even my voice. I sat down hard, my knees too weak to hold me. The room blurred around me, colours fading in and out, but the images from that phone burned sharp and merciless in my mind. Her belly, his hand, their secret. Our secret. No, not ours. Theirs. And suddenly I felt small, invisible, erased from the story of my own life. Shame flooded me, hot and suffocating. I thought of the neighbours, the friends who always said what a solid couple we were. I thought of my children, our children. What would they say? What would they think? That their father was building a new life while destroying the old one? That their mother hadn't seen it coming? Anger struck next, sharp and bitter. My fists clenched. I wanted to smash something, anything to break glass, the way my heart was breaking. I wanted to storm into his office, shove the phone in his face, scream the questions clawing at my throat. How long? Who is she? Why wasn't I enough? And then, grief. A tidal wave sweeping me under. The years replayed in fragments. Our wedding day, his nervous hands fumbling with the ring, his smile when he held our firstborn, the way he used to kiss my forehead when he thought I was asleep. Were those moments lies too? Or did they die somewhere along the way, quietly, while I wasn't paying attention? The world no longer felt steady. It spun too fast, pulling me down into a place I didn't recognize, a place where trust was broken, where love was tainted, where nothing was certain. I buried my face in my hands, sobs shaking my body. I whispered into the emptiness. Why, Michael? Why would you do this to me? But the silence answered back, cold and merciless. And I knew that whatever life I thought I had, whatever marriage I thought I belonged to, it was gone. The ground beneath me had split wide open and I was falling through. That evening I set the table as if nothing had happened, though my hands shook with every plate I laid down. The clink of silverware felt too loud, the scrape of a chair against the floor too sharp, like the world itself had grown crueler in sound. Michael came in with that same easy smile, loosening his tie, kissing my cheek, as if my heart weren't lying in pieces on the kitchen floor. He spoke about his day, some project at work, a difficult client, the traffic on the way home. His voice was calm, steady, ordinary. He buttered his bread, poured himself a glass of water, and laughed at his own small complaint about gas prices. To anyone else, he looked like the same man, the same husband I had lived beside for decades. But to me, he was a stranger wearing my husband's skin. I nodded, forced small sounds of acknowledgement. My lips curved into what must have passed for a smile, though inside my chest, a storm raged so violently I could barely swallow. Every word he spoke felt like an act, a rehearsed performance. I kept thinking, how can he sit there so casually while I can still see the photos burned into my mind? How can he laugh when I can still feel the sting of betrayal in every heartbeat? I watched him carefully, searching for cracks in his mask. The way his eyes flickered down at his phone each time it lit up, the subtle hesitation before he met my gaze, the way he chewed too slowly, as if buying time. Each tiny gesture felt like confirmation, though he didn't realize I was studying him as if he were evidence. And yet, part of me wondered if he sensed it too, the distance, the gap between us. We were sitting at the same table, but I swear it felt like we were in two different worlds. Mine, heavy with grief and suspicion. His, light and unbothered, untouched by the truth that was crushing me. At one point he reached across, brushed my hand with his fingers. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his tone gentle. I forced a smile, the kind that doesn't touch the eyes, and whispered, "Just tired." Inside, though, I was screaming questions I didn't dare let out, screaming from the weight of secrets I wasn't supposed to know. As we cleared the dishes together, his laughter still ringing in the air, I realized I was already playing a role I never asked for. I was the silent wife, wearing a mask of her own, and beneath it, I was breaking. I didn't scream that night. I didn't throw the phone in his face or demand an explanation. Instead, I carried my questions inside, like stones in my pockets, dragging me down with their weight. And so I did the only thing I could. I whispered to myself in the silence, confessing to the walls, to the darkness, to anyone who might be listening on the other side of my thoughts. It felt almost like talking to a friend, though no one was there. I imagined someone sitting across from me, nodding gently, not judging, just listening. "What would you do?" I asked the empty room. "If you found proof that the life you built was nothing but smoke? Would you pretend you hadn't seen it? Would you wait for the fire to burn down your house before you admitted the smoke was real?" The silence gave me no answer, but in that quiet I let the words flow. I admitted the things I couldn't say to Michael, that I felt humiliated, betrayed, old in a way I had never felt before. That somewhere deep inside I wondered if this was my fault, if I had missed signs, if I had grown too comfortable, if I had stopped being enough. I told the silence about the years we had shared, the way he used to bring me coffee in bed, the way his eyes lit up when he saw me in a new dress. Were those memories still mine? Or had they been rewritten by his betrayal, turned into lies retroactively? I confessed my fear of being alone, fear of becoming a woman whispered about in grocery store aisles, pitied at church gatherings. Fear that my children would see me as weak, broken, unable to hold the family together. And then I admitted the deepest truth of all. I wasn't ready to confront him because I didn't want the answer. As long as I kept the questions locked inside, there was still a thread of hope, thin, fraying, but unbroken. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe the photos were misunderstood, staged, old, anything but real. I knew I was lying to myself, but the silence was kind. It didn't argue. It let me speak, let me pour out my heart until my chest ached less and my eyes grew heavy. That night, as I lay down beside Michael, his steady breathing beside me, I whispered one last thought into the dark. If I say it out loud, it becomes real, and I'm not ready for real. The next morning, I could barely look at him. Every movement felt rehearsed, The way he buttoned his shirt, tied his shoes, poured his coffee. I wanted to reach across the table and shake him, to shout that I knew, that I wasn't blind. But instead, I folded my hands around my cup and studied the steam as if it held the courage I needed. When he finally sat down, scrolling absently through his phone, I took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. "Michael," I said softly, almost too softly, "is there something you want to tell me?" The words hung in the air, fragile and trembling. He looked up sharply, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. "What do you mean?" His voice was calm, but the edge beneath it cut through me. "I don't know," I whispered, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "You've seemed distracted. And the other day, I found—" I stopped myself before the truth spilled out, before I confessed that I had seen everything. My heart hammered. "I just feel like something's not right." For a long second, he didn't speak. He set his phone down with a deliberate slowness, his jaw tightening. "You're imagining things," he said flatly. "You always overthink. Nothing's wrong." But it wasn't the words that crushed me. It was the tone, dismissive, irritated, as if I were a nuisance for even asking. He didn't reach for my hand, didn't smile to reassure me, didn't soften his voice. He just pushed his chair back and stood up. "I don't have time for this," he muttered, grabbing his keys. "I'm already late." And then he was gone, the front door slamming shut behind him. I sat frozen at the table, my coffee growing cold, my fingers clenched so tightly around the mug that they ached. My question had been careful, gentle, almost pleading, and his answer had been a wall, solid and impenetrable. That wall told me more than words ever could. I whispered into the empty kitchen, "If there was nothing, why would you be so angry? Why would you run?" The silence pressed against me, merciless, and in that silence my doubts hardened into something darker, heavier. He hadn't denied it, not really. He had only dismissed me. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the floor. My body felt hollow, but inside my chest, the storm gathered strength. He could avoid my questions. He could shut the door on conversations, but the truth was already living in this house, and it was only a matter of time before it demanded to be spoken aloud. That night the house was still, but my mind refused to rest. I lay in bed beside Michael, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, so calm, so unbothered, while my own chest rose and fell with shallow, restless gasps. The ceiling above me blurred in the shadows, and I felt like I was staring into a vast emptiness, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, memories came flooding back, uninvited and merciless. The first time Michael reached for my hand at the county fair, shy but certain. The day he stood at the end of the aisle, his eyes wet with tears, waiting for me in his suit that was a little too big. The way he cradled our newborn daughter, whispering promises I thought would last forever. I saw the small gestures, the morning coffees he once brought me without fail, the way he used to sneak notes into my purse, little scribbles of love that made me blush even after years of marriage. I saw us dancing in the kitchen to music only we could hear, his arms strong and sure around me. Those moments had been my foundation, the proof that love was not just a word, but a life we had built together. And yet, as I lay there, the present pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. The images from his phone returned, sharp and cruel, overlaying every tender memory. A younger woman's smile where mine used to be. His hand resting on her belly, the same hand that once held mine. Laughter, intimacy, devotion, but not with me. Not anymore. I turned onto my side, staring at his profile in the dim light. He looked peaceful, even handsome still, though lines had deepened around his eyes. How strange, I thought, that the same face that once made me feel safe could now make me feel like I was drowning. The contrast was unbearable, the warmth of the past against the coldness of now. I felt as though I had been pushed out of my own life, replaced, discarded. I whispered into the dark, so quietly, even I could barely hear it. What happened to us? When did we stop being enough? But the night offered no answers, only the echo of my own questions. Hours passed, my body exhausted but my mind unwilling to surrender. By dawn, my eyes burned, heavy with unshed tears, and I realized with a hollow ache that the man lying beside me was both my husband and my stranger. And I didn't know which one hurt more. The truth arrived without warning, like a blade slipping quietly between ribs. We were sitting in the living room, the late afternoon sun spilling across the carpet. I had asked again, this time without hesitation, without disguising the tremor in my voice. Michael, I need you to be honest with me. Is there someone else? For a long moment he didn't answer. He stared at the floor, his fingers tapping against the armrest of his chair. The silence stretched so thin I thought it might snap. Then, finally, he looked at me. His eyes were steady, his voice calm, almost too calm. Yes, he said. Just one word, but it split my world in two. I felt the air leave my lungs, as if someone had punched me in the chest. I gripped the edge of the sofa, trying to steady myself. My voice came out in a whisper. Barely there. How long? Almost a year, he replied, his tone flat, detached, as though he were giving me the weather report. Her name is Emily. She's pregnant. The word struck me harder than any blow. Pregnant. The sound of it echoed in my ears, cold and merciless. I wanted to cover my ears to stop it from reaching me, but it was too late. It was already inside me, poisoning every corner of my heart. I searched his face for something, regret, shame, a flicker of the man I once knew. But there was nothing. No tears, no trembling, no apologies. Just a quiet certainty, as if he had already made peace with it long before speaking it aloud. My mind raced through decades in an instant, the vows we spoke, the children we raised, the nights we held each other when the world outside seemed too much. Were all of those moments disposable? Was I disposable? I heard my own voice, sharp and broken. And what about us, Michael? What about this family? What about me? He looked at me then, finally, and for the first time I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, resolve. I didn't plan it, but it happened. And now I have to do what's right. The words cut deeper than any confession. Do what's right. As if everything we had shared, everything we had built, was suddenly wrong. I felt myself unraveling, piece by piece, but I held my silence. Because in that moment I knew our marriage, our story, the life I thought unshakable was already over. And there was no way back. I wandered into the bathroom after he left the room, the echo of his words still ringing inside me like church bells tolling for the dead. Pregnant. Another woman. Another life. My body felt numb, as if I had been dipped into ice water, but my mind was fire, burning, searing everything I touched. The mirror above the sink caught me, held me captive. I stared at the woman looking back, and for a moment I didn't recognize her. Her eyes were red, swollen, shadowed by sleepless nights. Her skin looked pale, fragile. Even her mouth seemed foreign, tight, trembling, unable to form the confident smile that once belonged there. I leaned closer, my palms pressed flat against the cold counter. "Who are you?" I whispered, my own voice hoarse, hollow. The woman in the mirror had lines etched deep around her eyes, not just from age but from sorrow. She looked like someone's mother, someone's wife, someone who had given and given until there was nothing left. She did not look like me. Memories flickered, me in my wedding dress, glowing and certain. Me laughing in the sunshine, hair loose around my shoulders, Michael's hand at the small of my back. Me rocking our children, singing lullabies with a voice that carried hope. Those images clashed against the woman I saw now, cracked and faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I touched my face, traced the lines with trembling fingers. For the first time, I felt old, not in years, but in spirit. Old because the love that had sustained me was gone, and without it I felt stripped bare, incomplete. Tears welled again, spilling down my cheeks. I tried to swallow them back, but they came anyway, unstoppable. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and sobbed quietly, like a child. I thought of the girl I used to be, full of hope and trust, and wondered when she had vanished. Was it gradual, or had she died in one sharp moment? The moment I saw those pictures, the moment he said the words aloud? The mirror didn't answer. It only reflected my brokenness, doubling it, forcing me to face it from every angle. I straightened finally, wiping my face with the back of my hand. My reflection blurred through tears, but even then I could see something had cracked. Something inside me had shattered like glass. And no matter how carefully I tried to piece it back together, I would never be the same woman again. It didn't take long for the children to notice. You think you can hide pain behind smiles, but children, no matter their age, see through masks more easily than anyone else. One evening, as I set dinner on the table, my daughter Anna touched my arm gently. Her voice was soft, careful. "Mum, are you okay? You've seemed different." I froze, spoon in hand, the stew steaming between us. Different. Such a simple word, yet it struck me like an accusation. I forced a smile, though my lips trembled. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired." But she didn't look convinced. Her eyes searched mine, worried and tender. Beside her, David shifted uneasily, glancing between us. Finally, he asked, "Is it Dad? Did something happen at work?" The questions landed heavy, heavier than I could carry. My instinct was to protect them, to shield them from the truth that was tearing me apart. They deserved their father, unbroken in their eyes. They deserved a mother who could smile without effort, laugh without cracking. So I laughed, a hollow sound that didn't fool me, though I hoped it might fool them. No, nothing like that. Don't worry yourselves. I just haven't been sleeping well. You know how it is when you get older. The nights get longer." Anna reached for my hand, squeezing it with a gentleness that nearly undid me. Her touch was warm, grounding, but it also reminded me of the weight I carried alone. I swallowed the lump in my throat, blinking back tears before they could fall. At dinner, I kept the conversation light, asked about their classes, their friends, their plans. I laughed at their stories, nodded at their complaints. But all the while I could feel their eyes on me, studying me, knowing something was wrong even if they didn't have the words. Later that night, when they had gone to their rooms, I sat in the kitchen with the lights dimmed, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. Protecting them felt like the only thing I had left, the last role I could still play. If I told them the truth, their world would break too, and I couldn't bear to see that shatter in their eyes. So I whispered into the silence, the same way I had so many nights before. "Not yet. They can't know yet." And though my chest ached with the weight of lies, I told myself it was love that kept me silent. Love, and the hope that somehow I could carry the burden for all of us a little longer. I heard the sound before I saw it, the sharp click of a suitcase opening, the low scrape of drawers sliding out. It was evening, the house quiet except for those heavy, final sounds. I stood at the doorway of our bedroom, frozen, watching as Michael folded shirts with methodical calm, stacking them neatly as though he were preparing for an ordinary trip. But this was no trip. This was the end. "Michael," my voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. He didn't look up, didn't pause, just kept folding. The rhythm of his movements was steady, merciless. I wanted to scream, to throw myself across the bed, to stop him, but my feet stayed planted as if nailed to the floor. The zipper of the suitcase dragged closed, a sound that felt like a blade tearing through fabric and flesh. He finally glanced at me, his expression unreadable, his eyes tired but certain. "It's better this way," he said quietly, as though rehearsed. "You'll see." Better this way. The words stung like poison. I wanted to ask, better for whom? For me, left behind in a house that would echo with emptiness? For our children, who would wake to find their father's side of the bed cold? Or better for him, free to chase a new life, a new family, a new child? I couldn't move as he lifted the suitcase from the bed, the wheels bumping down the stairs. Each thud echoed in my chest, rattling through my bones. The children stayed in their rooms, silent, sensing that something irreversible was happening. I prayed they wouldn't come out, wouldn't see the way their mother stood helpless while their father walked away. At the door, he turned once more, as if waiting for me to say something that would make this easier for him. But no words came. My throat was thick with grief, my lips frozen. So he nodded slightly, almost politely, and opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, biting my skin, and then the sound came, the click of the latch, the hollow slam of the door closing. The house groaned with silence afterward. Every corner felt larger, emptier, as though the walls themselves had exhaled. I stood in the entryway, my hand pressed against the wood of the door, feeling its chill seep into me. And just like that, he was gone. The man I had built my life around, the man I had trusted beyond all reason, had walked out carrying pieces of me in his suitcase. The house that once rang with laughter now felt hollow. Every shadow deeper, every sound louder. Home had turned into nothing but walls and silence. The morning after he left was the strangest of my life. I woke up to a silence so complete it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. For a moment, half asleep, I reached across the bed out of habit. My hand found only cool sheets, the empty space where Michael had slept for decades. The hollow ache returned, sharp and immediate. I pulled myself out of bed slowly, each step heavy, my body carrying the memory of the night before. In the kitchen, the routine tried to continue on its own. I filled the kettle, laid out a single mug instead of two. I stared at it for a long time. One mug, one spoon, one life. It seemed so small, so unfamiliar. When the coffee was ready, I sat at the table in the silence, sipping slowly. No sound of his chair scraping across the floor, no newspaper rustling, no casual complaints about traffic. Just me and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The loneliness pressed close, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. And yet, beneath the weight, something else stirred. It was faint at first, a flicker I almost ignored. A sense of space, of freedom. I didn't have to wait for his footsteps, his voice, his presence filling every corner. The house was mine, the morning mine. For the first time in years, I could sit in silence without anyone asking why I was so quiet. I let myself breathe, really breathe. The air seemed different, lighter, though it carried the scent of loss. I realized that for so long my life had been shaped around him, his moods, his needs, his routines. And now, with him gone, there was emptiness. Yes, but also room. Room for me. Still, the ache lingered. I glanced at the front door more than once, half expecting him to return, suitcase abandoned, eyes filled with regret. But the door stayed closed, the silence unbroken. I carried my coffee to the window, looking out at the morning sun stretching across the yard. The world outside moved on, indifferent to the collapse of my marriage. Birds sang, neighbours left for work, cars passed by. Life, relentless, continued. And so I sat there, one hand curled around a warm mug, the other pressed against my chest as though to keep my heart from slipping out. It hurt. God, it hurt. But somewhere in that pain was the faintest whisper. You are still here. He left, but you remain. And in that lonely morning, I realized Being left behind wasn't the same as being gone. That evening the house was still quiet, but it no longer felt like I was entirely alone. The children seemed to sense it, the finality of their father's absence, the heaviness that hung in every corner of the house. Anna came into the kitchen first, wordless, her face pale but determined. She walked straight to me, her arms wrapping around my shoulders, her cheek pressed against my hair. I froze for a moment and then I let myself lean into her warmth. "I'm here, Mom," she whispered. Just 3 words, but they broke something inside me, something brittle and jagged. I clung to her, my tears falling onto her sleeve. For the first time since the suitcase rolled out the door, I didn't feel like I was falling through empty space. I felt held. A moment later, David appeared. Awkward at first, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He stood there watching us, his eyes dark with worry. Then, with a sigh that sounded older than his years, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both of us. I felt his chest rise and fall against mine, strong, solid, grounding. My children, my anchors. We stayed that way for a long time, the 3 of us tangled together in silence. No one needed to explain. No one needed to name what had happened. They already knew enough, maybe more than I wished they did. And yet, in their embrace, the cold emptiness that had consumed me all day began to thaw. We cooked dinner together that night, though none of us were really hungry. Anna chopped vegetables, David stirred the pot, and I moved between them, guided by the rhythm of our togetherness. The kitchen filled with the sound of knives on the cutting board, spoons clinking against metal and, most healing of all, the sound of laughter. Small, hesitant at first, but real. Later, as we sat around the table, I looked at their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the lamp. I saw strength there, resilience I hadn't given them enough credit for. They weren't broken by this. They were reaching for me, holding me up when I thought I couldn't stand. That night, when I kissed them goodnight, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. Life had taken so much, stripped me bare. But it had left me this, 2 hearts bound to mine, 2 souls who refused to let me fall apart. Their embrace was more than comfort. It was a promise that we would go on, together. It didn't take long for the whispers to begin. Small towns, even friendly neighborhoods, have a way of carrying stories faster than the wind. At first, it was the neighbors' glances, lingering a little too long as I collected the mail. A tight smile, a soft, "How are you doing?" spoken with that careful tone people use when they already know the answer. Then it spread. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on me as I pushed the cart down the aisle. 2 women by the produce section leaned close, their voices hushed, their eyes darting in my direction. I didn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. The look of pity, of fascination told me everything. At church, the weight grew heavier. A hand on my shoulder, a whisper of, "We're praying for you," spoken in a voice soaked with sympathy. Another friend avoided me altogether, as if my broken marriage might be contagious. Their compassion hurt almost as much as their silence. Every gesture reminded me of what had been lost, what had been betrayed. It stung, God, it stung. To be reduced to a story, a cautionary tale told in kitchens over coffee, to be pitied instead of respected. I wanted to shout, to tell them they didn't know the half of it, that I wasn't some weak woman clinging to the wreckage, but my voice caught in my throat every time, drowned out by the echo of their whispers. And yet, something strange began to form beneath the pain. A hardness, a resilience I hadn't felt before. Every glance that cut me, every word laced with pity was like fire tempering steel. The more they judged me, the more determined I became to stand taller, even if my knees were still shaking inside. One afternoon, leaving the store with Anna, I heard a woman murmur, "Poor thing, he left her for someone half her age." The words sliced through me, but before I could react, Anna gripped my hand tightly and said, loud enough for them to hear, Come on, Mom. Let's go home. Her voice was steady, protective. In that moment, I realized I didn't need to fight the whispers. My life, my survival would speak louder than gossip ever could. I walked out of that store with my head high, my daughter beside me, the whispers trailing behind like meaningless echoes. They could talk, they could pity, they could judge, but I was still here. And with every step, I felt myself becoming stronger, sharper, less defined by his choices, and more defined by my own. It came to me in the quiet, in one of those long evenings when the children had gone to bed and the house was mine alone. I sat at the kitchen table with a half-empty cup of tea, staring at the faint ring it had left on the wood. My mind replayed everything: the suitcase, the slam of the door, the whispers, the pity. For weeks I had carried it all like a chain around my neck. But that night something inside me stirred, fierce and unfamiliar. A thought rose up, bold and defiant. I am not a victim. I said it out loud, my voice trembling at first, then stronger. I am not a victim. The words felt strange in my mouth, like trying on a new pair of shoes, stiff but promising. I repeated them until my chest expanded with the sound, until my pulse matched the rhythm of those 4 syllables. Yes, Michael had betrayed me. Yes, my marriage was broken. But was I broken? No. Not unless I let myself be. The thought lit a spark in me, a fire that spread through the cracks where grief had lived. I realized that while he had chosen a new life, I still had mine. And mine wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I pushed back from the table and walked to the mirror in the hallway, the same mirror that had once reflected a woman I barely recognized. This time, I studied my own face differently. The lines around my eyes weren't just sorrow. They were proof of years lived, battles fought, children raised. My body wasn't ruined by age. It was marked with strength. I had carried life, nurtured it, and survived more than I gave myself credit for. For the first time in weeks, I felt a quiet pride, a seed of power. He might have taken his love, his promises, but he hadn't taken me. I whispered to my reflection, steady now. My life is not over. I will not let his choices define me. That night, I wrote a list in my journal, small things, simple things I wanted to reclaim. Walking in the park, calling an old friend, reading the stack of books I'd been too busy for. They seemed insignificant compared to the devastation I'd endured, but they were mine, and they were a start. As I closed the journal and turned off the light, I felt it, the rebellion inside me. Quiet, steady, but alive. No, I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a woman rebuilding herself piece by piece, and that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. It started with the smallest things. One morning, I laced up my shoes and stepped outside just to walk around the block. The air was crisp, the sky painted in soft shades of blue. And for the first time in weeks, I noticed the sound of birds singing from the trees. It was such a simple moment, yet it filled me with something I hadn't felt in so long: peace. My steps were slow, measured, but with each one I felt lighter, as if the weight I'd been dragging behind me had loosened its grip. Later that week, I picked up a book that had been sitting untouched on the nightstand for months. I curled up in my chair by the window, letting the story carry me away. The words wrapped around me like an old friend, reminding me that there were still worlds to explore, even if they were made of ink and paper. I laughed at passages that were witty, sighed at ones that were tender, and when I closed the cover, I realized I had spent an entire afternoon without thinking of Michael. That, in itself, felt like a triumph. The greatest joy, though, came in the quiet conversations with Anna. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, she told me about her day, her classes, her friends, the little frustrations and triumphs of being young and finding her place in the world. I listened, really listened, and found myself smiling at her stories. There was a warmth in her laughter that reached inside me, thawing the cold places I thought might never heal. We sat at the table afterward, just the two of us, the dishes steaming between us. She reached across, squeezed my hand and said, "You're stronger than you think, Mom." Tears pricked at my eyes, but this time they weren't from sorrow. They were from gratitude. Gratitude that even in the wreckage I still had moments like this, small, precious, unshakable. I began to notice more of them. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery, the way the afternoon light spilled golden across the living room floor, the laughter of children playing down the street. These little fragments of joy wove themselves into my days, reminding me that life was not just pain, not just betrayal. One evening, standing at the window with a cup of tea in my hands, I whispered to myself, "Happiness doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it hides in the small things, waiting for you to notice." And for the first time, I believed it. One evening, I sat in the living room, the lamps glowing softly, the hum of the dishwasher in the background. Anna was stretched out on the couch with a book, David upstairs with his music. The house, though quieter than it once had been, no longer felt hollow. It felt alive in a different way, gentler, warmer, ours. I looked around at the walls that had seen both laughter and tears, at the photographs framed in gold and wood, capturing decades of moments, birthdays, graduations, holidays. They were proof that my life had been full, that it still was full. Michael had chosen another path, but he hadn't taken these things from me. He hadn't taken my children, my memories, my home, or my ability to keep loving. For the first time in months, the thought of tomorrow didn't scare me. The future stretched out like a road I didn't yet know, but I no longer saw it as a threat. Instead, I saw possibilities. Days filled with my children's laughter, evenings with friends, mornings where I could wake up and breathe without the weight of betrayal pressing down. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the table, letting the steam rise around me. I whispered aloud, almost to test the sound of the words, "I'm still here. I'm still me." The statement was simple, but it felt like a declaration, a victory. Quiet, steady, but real. There was no parade, no dramatic turning point, just the soft realization that I had survived. That survival itself was an act of strength. The wounds hadn't vanished, the scars would remain, but I could live with them. They would remind me not of weakness, but of endurance. When Anna came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, she smiled at me. Not the cautious smile she had worn in those first painful days, but a genuine one. "You look lighter, Mom," she said. I laughed softly, surprised by the sound of it, clear, almost musical. "Maybe I am," I told her. Later, when the house grew quiet again, I stood at the doorway and watched the night settle in. I didn't feel abandoned anymore. I felt grounded, rooted. My life wasn't over. It was simply different. And in that difference, there was room for something new to grow. The victory wasn't loud or dramatic. It was in the way I could look at myself in the mirror and not flinch. In the way I could breathe deeply without fear. It was a quiet victory, but it was mine. If you've stayed with me through this story, then you know the truth. I lost him. Michael walked away, suitcase in hand, and he never came back. For a long time, I thought that moment had destroyed me, that his leaving had taken everything worth living for. But I was wrong, because here I am, still standing, still breathing, still living. He left, yes, but I remained. And in my remaining, I discovered something I had forgotten, that I am more than someone's wife, more than the shadow of a man's choices. I am a woman with her own life, her own voice, her own heart still beating strong inside her chest. The nights are still quiet, sometimes too quiet. There are moments when I reach across the bed, half asleep, expecting to find him there. There are mornings when loneliness sits beside me like an unwelcome guest. But those moments pass, and in their place I've learned to welcome something else. Myself. I found joy again, not in grand gestures but in the smallest things. The laughter of my children, the softness of sunlight on the kitchen floor, the smell of coffee in the early morning. I found strength in silence, courage in survival, and hope in the simple act of continuing on. Do I still feel the ache of betrayal? Of course. Scars don't disappear. They become part of you, but they don't define me. What defines me now is the way I rose from the wreckage, the way I chose not to be crushed by someone else's decision. If you're listening to me now, if you've ever felt broken or left behind, hear this. You are not less because someone chose to walk away. You are not smaller because someone failed to see your worth. You are still here. And that, my friend, is its own kind of triumph. He may have left to start a new life, but I am building mine from the ground up, with honesty, with resilience, with love that belongs to me and my children. It isn't the life I expected, but it is a life I am learning to cherish. So this is where my story pauses, not ends, but pauses. Because there is more ahead for me, more to discover, more to embrace. And if I had to leave you with one truth, one sentence to carry with you, it would be this. Sometimes losing someone is the way we finally find ourselves. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.